A very good evening to all of you. I welcome you all to the ICANN initiative, the Hindu and Indian Express analysis. Today, rather than discussing any motivational story or personality, first of all, congratulations that we have completed 3 months of ICANN together. And I would like to motivate you all today by quoting few things that how far we have progressed in the preparation so far. So in these 3 months, we have covered 321 topics covering all the GS papers, and we have covered 57 questions. And if I talk about GS1, we have done nearly 26 topics and we have covered 6 questions. In GS2, we have done 190 topics and 26 questions. In GS3, we have done 95 topics and 18 questions. And in GS4, we have done 10 topics and 7 questions. So this should be a good confidence booster for all of you, because it doesn't seem to be consuming so much amount of time per day. But now looking at the journey after the completion of 3 months, it looks that we have completed so many things, and this is the beauty of consistency. So when you're putting consistent efforts, even though every day doesn't take much time out of you, but at the end of a good amount of time you feel that you have completed a lot many things, and this is precisely should be the strategy of your preparation for an exam like UPSC. And even your value addition, so stories we have covered 23 stories, quotations we have done 14, personalities we have covered 23. So like this, we have been able to do a lot of coverage in the value addition itself. So even in this essay related things we have done a few, and then we have also covered some data exclusively for the GS purposes. We have covered various answer writing tips which will help you in writing the answers. So overall, this whole value addition itself, we have covered 105 important things which is going to help you across all the GS papers. So this should be a very good motivation for you to continue these efforts. And now at the end of 6 months, you will see that we have covered almost everything related to the current affairs in all the 4 papers. So I wish you all the best. Continue your consistent effort every day by following the initiative, and take down your notes and then keep revising them periodically. So no other effort is going to be as rewarding as this consistent small everyday efforts that you're doing, which is very much directed towards your goal. So all the best and keep this going. The next topic we'll be discussing is Manrega versus the Garib Kalyan Rozgar Abhiyan, which has been recently launched. So regarding Manrega, we have already discussed in detail what are the features of the scheme and how Manrega has fared since the time it has been launched. So a critical analysis of this scheme we have already done. So what we are going to do in this is to compare the two and see why the two can be complementary, and Garib Kalyan Rozgar Abhiyan should not be a replacement of Manrega. So first, for that, let's understand the current status of Manrega. So once the lockdown was imposed, the work under Manrega was stopped, and people were not given work. So, but later on, because of the migrant crisis and people were losing jobs, they didn't have money even to buy their food and medicines. So the work under Manrega started, and government has also then made more allocation for Manrega so that more amount of work could be generated. So in fact, the number of households who got work in April 2020 was the lowest in several years of Manrega's performance, which was at 95 lakh. So only 95 lakh people got work in April 2020 because of the COVID and the lockdown. And this number then goes up to 3.05 crore in the month of May, when the scheme was open and people started approaching for and demanding the job under this scheme. So from this low, it went to this high. But also because there was this trend of reverse migration and the workers now going back to their home state, in the future, the demand is only going to increase much more. But even among these cases where the work has been given to people, the disturbing fact is that nearly 1.82 crore of the workers who demanded work were turned back because there was no work to be given to them. At the same time, they were these workers who were turned back, they were also not given any unemployment allowance, which they are supposed to be given if within 15 days they are not given work after their demand. So if we take for example Bihar is one of the states where the large number of migrants have returned back. So 12 lakh workers out of 41 lakh workers who had demanded work under Manrega, they have been turned back. So 12 lakh workers without work is a very huge disappointment as far as working of the scheme is concerned. And they have also not been given unemployment allowance. Even a single rupee of compensation has not been paid to the workers. So because of, and also now that the rainy season is approaching, the demand is going to be high from the side of the workers, but the work provision is still going to be low. So in this case, it is much more possible in the months to come that there will be more workers who are demanding work, but at the same time, they are not being given any work because there is the work in the rainy season will be less. So it is all the more essential now for the central government to ensure that states have sufficient funds with them and the states are capable of giving unemployment allowance to the workers who are demanding work but who are not able to for whom work is we cannot provide. So in at this backdrop, central government has now come out with a new scheme which is Garib Kalyan Rozgar Abhiyan. So first we will understand what the Kalyan Rozgar Abhiyan is and then we will analyze few issues related to it. So the first thing is that this scheme is going to be implemented in 116 selected districts. So these are those districts which have seen the highest number of migrants from these districts. So the selection of the district is based upon the high number of migrants in that particular district. So this scheme is going to be selectively implemented in just 116 selected districts where the migration is more. So where the number of migrants is more than 25,000, that is a criteria. So this is the basic of this scheme. Now the issues with respect to this. The first thing is that between June 20th and June 28th, just in 1 week, on this scheme, nearly 4,700 crore rupees has been spent. And out of this 4,700 crore which has been spent in this just 1 week, 50% of the funds has been spent on Bihar alone. Yes, the fact is Bihar has a large number of migrant population and therefore it needs more allocation. But what is also being analyzed is that Bihar is going for election this year. So therefore it may be possible that this scheme is now and funds under this scheme are mainly focused on Bihar so as to serve some narrow political gains. So this is also possible that at this point of time when the migrants are really suffering, the narrow political gains should not come into picture at this point of time. So this issue is there that it can serve some political purpose also. So which may not eventually end up benefiting the migrants who are deprived of job opportunities. The second issue is that the Garib Kalyan Rozgar Abhiyan talks about 25 kinds of work which can be taken up under this particular scheme. So the nature of work is usually manual work which involves construction, laying of cables and all that. And most of these 25 works which have been listed under the Garib Kalyan Rozgar Yojana, they are almost all of them are also covered under the convergence programs of Manrega also. So then what is the difference when these kinds of work are already covered under Manrega and the government is now coming with a separate scheme of Garib Kalyan Rozgar Yojana? So this issue is that the similar kinds of work is being proposed even under the new scheme, then why not use the previously available scheme itself and why bring about a new scheme? This is the second issue. The third issue is that if you look at the last year performance of Manrega in these 116 districts, the average work days provision in these 116 districts for Manrega is 43.7 work days. So on an average, 43.7 work days were provided to people who demanded work in these 116 districts. But the national average was 50 work days. So which means in these 116 districts, the number of work days provided to the people who demanded work was less than the national average. And it is because of the fact that the work provided was less here, the people from these districts had migrated. So that is a very good reason why people would have migrated from these districts. So now the important focus should be to provide these workers more number of work days so that they are not forced to again migrate to cities in search of jobs. So the need of the hour is therefore to expand Manrega and to ensure that these people are provided more number of work days back in their districts so as to ensure that they don't migrate to cities in search of jobs. But rather than expanding Manrega, government has now brought a new scheme, and we don't know how it works, particularly because it is also covering the same set of work as that is under Manrega. So this is the third issue related to the scheme. Fourth is that Manrega is based on an act, but this Garib Kalyan Rozgar Abhiyan is just a policy that is announced by the government, and therefore there is no legal. The Garib Kalyan Rozgar Abhiyan is it is not legally binding on the administration, but whereas Manrega is. So this can create a huge amount of difference when provision of work to the needy comes into picture. So that is the fourth issue associated with this. The fifth important issue is that this whole scheme, the Garib Kalyan Rozgar Abhiyan, is only for the migrants. So the migrants who are in these 116, only they will be targeted and only they will be given work under this Abhiyan. So, however, if you look at the migrants in these 116 districts, these migrants are mostly men. Of course, some of them are women also. But under Manrega, more than 50% of the people who demanded job under Manrega in these 116 districts were women. So nearly 53.5% of the people who demanded work under Manrega in these 116 districts were actually women. But this scheme has been, this Abhiyan is restricted only to migrants, and among the migrants, the number of women are less. So therefore, the women beneficiaries of this scheme is going to be very less, and women are going to be left out. So if this scheme is coming as a substitute of Manrega, then a lot of women who would have otherwise demanded job and who would have otherwise worked and had their share of money, that set of women is now going to drastically reduce. So the high demand from the women on the one hand is there, but under this Abhiyan, as it is meant for just the migrants and women migrants are less in number, women are likely to be excluded from this scheme. So these are the several issues which are present in this current scheme. So therefore the conclusion is it is better to expand Manrega and to ensure that more number of migrants get jobs so that they are not forced to migrate back to the cities in spite of the risk, rather than coming out with a new scheme now. So that is the whole issue about Manrega versus Garib Kalyan Rozgar Abhiyan. So now we'll go to the next topic, which is about digitizing trading. Because of the COVID pandemic, India's exports year on year in April 2020 contracted by 60%. So trade compared to last April and this April, it has contracted by 60% because of the COVID pandemic. So now that the COVID is there, even when the world, even in a post-COVID world, the trading is going to be completely changed, where we will look for more digitization and more automation and less human intervention when it comes to global trading. So the global trading norms is going to now completely change in a post-COVID world. So there are two important pillars on which the global trade in the future in a post-COVID world is going to be based on. First is there has to be digitization of the procedures which are involved in trading. And second is there has to be low human intervention in the entire process of trading. So these will be the two important pillars which will govern the post-COVID trade across the globe. So now we will analyze India's preparedness regarding these two pillars. So in this, once India had signed the Trade Facilitation Agreement or TFA with the World Trade Organization in 2016, after that India took up a lot of measures, a lot of steps to facilitate trade. This it did by including various and developing various digital platforms which can enable faster trading at the borders. So under this, India took up the direct port entry scheme was launched, then direct port delivery was done, and then the RFIDs were used. So the radio frequency identification system was used to faster the movement in the ports. Then single window interfaces were used so that the time involved in various processes is reduced. So all of these measures were taken in order to reduce the time of clearing the goods at the ports, and also the cost of clearance was also reduced because of all this. Then another important scheme was e-Sanchit. E-Sanchit is actually e-storage and computerized handling of indirect tax documents. So this again was aimed at reducing the human interference that is involved in the entire process. So because of these various measures that India has taken, it resulted in the improvement in our ease of doing business. So our ease of doing business, particularly EODB, has a parameter that's called as trading across borders. So in this, we improved our ranking a lot, and India was ranked as 68 rank in trading across border of EODB in 2020. So these measures helped us to improve our ranking in trading across borders. So now that we have the COVID crisis, and there is going to be in the post-COVID world more demand for these digital platforms and a reduction in the human interference. So the trade facilitation measures that we have already adopted through all these measures, we will have to expedite that, and we will further have to work upon these so that the post-COVID trade will be better managed, and there will be less human interference and more digitization and automation. But however, there still are several issues when it comes to our trading platforms. So though we have the digital platforms, but then there are flaws with respect to effective implementation over these digital platforms. So the implementation part is also lacking. The next thing is many times technical glitches will be there on these digital platforms. Because of the technical glitches, the users of the system, they start using the hard copy. So a parallel use of hard copy will keep on going because of frequent technical glitches that appear in the digital systems. Also, there are various stakeholders of the system, and there is no effective communication between the various stakeholders in the system. So this lack of communication also results in delayed cargo clearance. So cargo clearance is affected because of poor communication among the stakeholders. Also, the personnel are also not completely equipped with the using of these digital platforms. So training and capacity building efforts also need to be done so that there is optimal utilization of the digital platforms. So these are some of the issues which we need to work for now to, so that in the post-COVID world, the India's trade with the global world improves. So we need to provide better training and capacity building for the officials so that there is optimal utilization of digital platforms. We have to ensure that we have a robust digital platform so that there is no technical glitch. We have to ensure effective communication among various stakeholders. So therefore, by completely in the future augmenting our digital infrastructure in the trade ecosystem, by enhancing our already present digital platforms, we will be able to achieve those two pillars which are required for the global trade in the post-COVID world. So this whole article was on how it is going to be the trading will happen in a post-COVID world, and for that what steps India has already taken, what is the current status, what may be some of the flaws, and what India can do about it. So now we will move to the next topic, which is SAARC and India's relation with SAARC. So now, because of the border tensions between India and China, the question arises that what has to be India's response to China regarding this. So many foreign policy experts have suggested that for this, India should deepen its relations with its neighboring countries, particularly the SAARC countries, and that will be a good response to China by improving our relations with the neighborhood so that China cannot have a leeway in the region of SAARC. But before we deal with that, we first need to understand that the China's role itself in the SAARC countries has been increasing. So China and Pakistan, we know they are all-weather friends. And when it comes to Nepal, again, Nepal is moving closer to China because China is helping out in infrastructure development in Nepal. Nepal is also a part of the Belt and Road Initiative. And related to Bangladesh, recently also China said that it will offer tariff exemption for 97% of the Bangladeshi products. So through this also Bangladesh is again very close to China. And even in Sri Lanka, China has massive investments So if you see all the SAARC countries, most of the SAARC countries, they already have very good relations with China, and China already has a good amount of leeway and control over these countries in our neighborhood. So in this at this backdrop, it becomes all the more important for us to reinvigorate our relationship with the SAARC countries. So how do we do that? For that, we should first of all not allow SARC to become less important for us. So, in the past, starting from 2014 itself, our SARC and our importance towards the SARC has been reducing. We have been trying to isolate Pakistan internationally because of Pakistan terrorism being emanating from Pakistan against India. So, we have been trying to isolate Pakistan internationally, and for this we have not paid much attention on the on SARC. So in fact, India's political interest in SARC has dipped significantly post 2014. So now SARC actually demands a lot of attention from India, given the current status of importance that we have attached to SARC. And for some time, we also tried to engage with the BIMSTEC countries so that we can popularize BIMSTEC, and BIMSTEC can serve as an alternative or a replacement of SARC. But that too is not possible. One, because there is no common identity and history between the BIMSTEC members, but there is among the SARC members. And also, BIMSTEC is more focused on the Bay of Bengal region, and this is not the right forum where we can engage all the South Asian countries. So this is not that forum where we can engage the South Asian countries. So because of this reasons, BIMSTEC cannot be a replacement of SARC, and now the time has come that we have to reinvigorate the SARC itself as a forum. So one very good way of doing this is to go for economic integration of the South Asian region. So in this regard, we must understand one very important data, that SARC region is one of the least economically integrated region in the world. So the intra-SARC trade, that is the trade among the SARC members, is just 5% of the total South Asian trade. But if you look at the same figure for ASEAN countries, the intra-ASEAN or the intra-regional trade for ASEAN is 25% of the total trade in the region. So this means that trade among and between the SAARC countries itself is very poor. So that means the economic integration in South Asia is in a very bad state. So because of this, there is now a need to improve the economic integration in the region. For that, we have to lower the tariff barriers. We have to remove the non-tariff barriers, so that there are no big hurdles in import and export of goods and services among the SAARC countries. So for that, a SAARC investment treaty was proposed, and it has been pending for negotiation since 2007. So we have to move forward on this investment treaty, and we have to see that this is passed, because if the SAARC countries have investments in each other countries, then their interests will be involved in those countries, because they see that their investments are there and their investments need to be protected. So for that, they will also be able to trade with each other. So these kinds of initiatives will help in bridging that trust deficit which the SAARC countries have among themselves. So in fact, according to the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, it has observed that the intra-ASEAN investment comprise of 19%, but the intra-SAARC investment is very poor. So intra-ASEAN investment is 19% of the total investment in that region, but the intra-SAARC investment is very, very low. So this is a time that we reinvigorate this. We start with a negotiation on investment treaty and invest in each other countries in the SAARC region to remove the trust deficit and be able to integrate economically better. But for doing this, there are few domestic challenges that India faces. First is that there is always an anti-Pakistan rhetoric that goes on in India. There is Islamophobia on the Indian side. So this anti-Pakistan rhetoric will prevent us from cooperating with Pakistan even in economic terms under the SAARC. Secondly, even regarding Bangladesh, also this recurrent use of the Bangladeshi migrant rhetoric is always there. And Bangladesh is now also not happy with the Citizenship Amendment Act. So the Bangladeshi migrant rhetoric, all of this is spoiling our relation with Bangladesh also. So this is going to reduce or dent India's soft power. So all of these kinds of divisive domestic politics is going to dent our soft power and is going to reduce our say in the SARC region. So these divisive Pakistan and anti-Bangladeshi rhetoric is going to breed an anti-India sentiment in the neighborhood, and it's going to reduce the trust that these countries have on India. So the trust deficit is going to be more, and there will be an anti-India sentiment in these countries. It is also going to dent our soft power if we adopt these divisive domestic policies. So this is one domestic challenge that we need to face and overcome. The next is that now we have started off with the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan and the vocal for local measures. So this actually at the outset it means that that we need to reduce our imports, and it is seen as signaling an import substitution. So if we are going back on protectionism, and if we are going back on looking inwards and reducing our imports from outside, so then again the deeper economic integration in the SARC region that we are now talking about, that will not be possible. So we have to keep this clear that one is the economic integration in the neighborhood, which will help us to develop deeper bond with these countries, and at the same time to developing self-reliance on those critical, important, crucial things for which the dependence should not be there. So Atmanirbharta does not mean that we will stop trading with the world. So this clear line of difference has to be demarcated, and we need to go for economic integration with the SARC, at the same time developing self-reliance in crucial and critical things. So this is another area where we need to work and clearly see the difference. So this was regarding India and SARC in the light of the China conflict. So now we'll move to the next topic, which is the missing women. So the UNFPA's State of World Population Report 2020 has come out now. So this talks about the number of missing women and the way they have increased. So the number of missing women were in 1970, it was in the world, it was 61 million. And now across the world, this has more than doubled. And in 2020, the number of missing women or missing girls has now become 142 million. So it says the first thing that this report notes is that 1 in 3 girls, they go missing globally because of sex selection. This sex selection can be either prenatal or it can be postnatal sex selection. So because of this sex selection, 1 in 3 girls globally are going missing. So this is one important observation that is done by the UNFPA report. The second is an estimated 1 in 9 deaths of the girls who are below 5 years of age happens because of the postnatal sex selection. So postnatal means the baby girl is born, and after that, before she reaches the age of 5 years, she dies or she's killed. So 1 in 9 death of girls who are below 5 years is because of postnatal sex selection. So this is the second thing that this report says. The report also says that this postnatal sex selection is going to reduce. Why? Because there is advance in the technology, and people have more access to the ultrasound imaging technology these days. So they don't have to wait till the baby is born to see that the baby is a girl and then kill it. Rather, they can kill it when the baby is in the womb itself. So this is the second observation that is made by the report. The third is the report talks about what is called as a marriage squeeze. So marriage squeeze means in many countries this phenomena of marriage squeeze is observed because the number of girls have come down because of the missing girls and the missing women concept. The prospective grooms are now far outnumbering the prospective brides. So there are not enough brides for the grooms. So this has resulted in human trafficking. So women are being trafficked from the poorer countries. For instance, even within India, women are trafficked to Haryana because it has very low sex ratio and there are no prospective brides there. So human trafficking, it results into for marriage, and it also results into in child marriages. So these are the two evil tendencies that this is giving rise to, which is called as a marriage squeeze, where the prospective grooms far outnumber the prospective brides. So these were the important observations of UNFPA report, and you can quote this whenever you are talking about the issues facing women. So now go to the next topic, which is regarding custodial deaths. The article talks about the DK Basu judgments. So these DK Basu judgments were given starting from 1986, when a complaint letter was converted into a PIL, and then that spawned several judgments. So after 1986, then again in 1996, and then in 2001 and 2015. So like this, the DK Basu judgments spawned a series of other judgments, and more than nearly 20 commandments were established regarding how should be the custodial treatment of the person who has been arrested. So in this, we will look at some important commandments which you can use it as a way forward in the answer, if the question is about custodial death and how we can minimize that. So the first thing is that whenever a person is being arrested, an arrest memo is to be prepared. So this arrest memo should contain all the details regarding the arrest. What is the time of the arrest? What is the place of the arrest? And also this arrest memo should be attested by a family member, or if the family member is not there, by any respectable member of the locality. So the arrest memo has to be attested by that person. And then the location of the arrest must also be intimated to the family or the nearest friend, and all the details regarding the time, place, this attestation, everything will have to be, the entire process will have to be recorded in a police register, so that the compliance can be verified also. So the police register will be there, which will record all these things, and the compliance can be verified. And also the details regarding the arrest should be notified to a nearest legal aid organization, so that the person who is arrested will get the legal aid as soon as possible. He is made aware of his legal rights by these legal aid organizations as soon as possible. So the legal aid organizations will be notified of the arrest. So that is a second thing that has to be done. And all the data related to the arrest, everything must also be centralized in a central police control room, so that again the compliance will be there, and if there is any breach of this, then departmental action will be taken. So departmental action for any breach in these guidelines will also be taken. And later on and further in 2015 judgments, further other commandments were also added, that in the states where SHRCs, the state human rights commissions, where they are not set up, they will have to be set up. And these SHRCs should play a role in ensuring that the custodial treatment is humane, and it does not violate the dignity of the person. So the state human rights commissions will have to be set up, and in those states where they are set up, there are huge vacancies. These vacancies will have to be filled. And under the National Human Rights Act, under the NHRC Act, under section 30, it talks about human right courts. So these human right courts must be made operationalized. This was another commandment. And then CCTVs must be installed in every police station. So this will help to this will keep an eye on the police behavior in the police station also. So the CCTV installation has to be done in the police station. And the non-official visitors must be there, who can do surprise checks on the prisons and the police stations, and they can see how the prisoners are being treated. And for any violations, there will be prosecution, and there will also be departmental action. So these were the various commandments that have been given as in a series of DK Basu judgments. So you can quote DK Basu judgments, and you can write these commandments as a way forward. But at the same time, if you have to analyze these steps that have been taken, there are low rates of initiating any prosecution against the accused police officers. So in spite of these commandments, several people have died in the custody. So yesterday itself, we saw how nearly 1,730 people have died in 2019 alone in the custody. So when people are dying, but no action has been initiated against the accused police officers till now. And even when departmental inquiries are being done, finally, if this departmental inquiry most or more often than not does not lead to any successful dismissal of the accused police officer who has been responsible for the custodial death. So therefore, once now that these DK Basu guidelines are there, the commandments are there, more important is then monitoring and implementation of these. So this can be done only by independent and civil society individuals at the police station level. So continuous monitoring has to be done whether the DK Basu commandments are being followed or not. And such independent civil society individuals who monitor the implementation of the DK Basu guidelines can be done under a court supervision. So this will ensure that these commandments are followed and those who breach it are also taken to action. So this was about the custodial deaths, the DK Basu judgments and the commandments. Now we will just have a look at this. Was an article on China again, which was a repetition. This also on the Chinese apps, which was not much, that some 59 odd Chinese apps have been banned, like TikTok, Share It, UC Browser and all that. So then this is regarding the GST and how there has been a fall in the GST collection, and how the states are facing a revenue shortfall, and it's important to give compensation to the states. And the same thing we have already seen previously multiple times. So these were just a repetition of the previously discussed content. Now we'll be discussing yesterday's question. So the question was about discussing the reasons for Naga insurgency and coming out with a solution for the same. So when such questions are given, the first thing you have to do is to draw the map of Northeast and show the boundaries of Nagaland, that it has boundaries with Assam, Manipur, Arunachal, and also the international boundary it shares with Myanmar. So that this map is very important, which has to be drawn in such questions. The second thing is, if it is a 15 marker question, you can also include a timeline, even though it is not asked in the question. If it is a 15 marker question, you can include a timeline telling a basic few basic and important things from starting from the demand for the Nagas for having independence till the current date. So as part of the timeline, you can just draw something like this, and then you can go on marking important events there. So in 1918 for the Naga Club was formed, and in 1929 the Naga Club approached the Simon Commission, and it told that they consider themselves independent and they want to determine their future themselves. And then in 1946, under AZ Fizo, they formed the Naga National Council, and they also declared the independence when India became independent. And then in 1950, the Naga National Council took up arms, and then it went underground. So it started violent insurgent activities in the region. And then in 1975, the Shillong Accord was signed. And when the Shillong Accord was signed, the major decision that was taken was that the NNC leadership, the Naga National Council leadership, agreed that it is going to give up arms. But this was not liked by two, so therefore the NNC broke up into NSCN. So they formed another separate group of NSCN, and then in 1988, NSCN further split into the Khaplang faction and the Isak Maiwa faction. So these important things, and then in 1997, a ceasefire agreement was signed, and then now in 2015, a framework agreement was signed. So this is the most important timeline, which denotes the most important events that have happened in the Naga insurgency. So you can just draw this timeline to describe the basics, and then you can go on to describing the reasons for Naga insurgency. So then we will discuss about the reasons for continuing Naga insurgency, and we are not able to find a lasting peace in the region. So the first is that they are demanding this because of their feeling that they are ethnically distinct. So their distinct ethnicity is itself prompting them to go to demand that independence from the rest of the other tribes in the region. And then is the Naga itself is not a single tribe. So the Naga word doesn't refer to a single tribe. It's a rubric which represents more than 25 tribes. So because it is a collection of more than 25 tribes, their interests and demands are also very different. So because their interests and demands are not the same, it is very difficult to come to a solution that is mutually acceptable for all of them. In fact, many of these tribes among the 25 are also culturally distinct also, and at the same time even they are linguistically non-intelligible to the other also. So this distinction is again hindering a common solution for all the Nagas. The third we can say is the poor leadership. There are multiple organizations that they claim that they represent the interest of all the Nagas, but none of them actually do. So for instance, the NSA and Kaplang, and then IM, and there are various other organizations also, and each of them, they have their own set of demands and they claim to represent the entire Naga interest, which is not the case. The fourth is that the neighboring states are opposing because the demands of the Nagas will hurt their territorial integrity. So this is related to the claim of Greater Nagalim. So the Greater Nagalim has areas from both from Assam, from Manipur and Arunachal Pradesh also, and even Myanmar. So the Greater Nagalim is going to hurt the territorial integrity of the neighboring states. So the neighboring states are also opposing such kind of a solution to the Naga insurgency. So this opposition by the neighboring states is also there, due to which a solution is not becoming possible. Next is unrealistic demands. So these Naga groups are making very unrealistic demands. For instance, the NSC and IM is claiming that it should have a separate constitution, it should have a separate flag. So all of these, and even having the Greater Nagalim, which has parts from even Myanmar, which is a separate sovereign country in itself. So these are unrealistic demands which cannot be satisfied at any point of time. So this unrealistic demand per se is a very important factor contributing to the whole issue not getting settled. Then is the presence of the armed militia. So many of these Naga organizations have their own armed militia. They are running their own parallel government structures, and they are resorting to extortions or forcible and illegal collection of money from the people. They are using arms and violence. And many times it has so happened that even the state governments, the state political parties have ended up using these armed gangs for coming to power. So this political parties have also ended up using these armed militia, and that is why these militia have been thriving in the state. So this presence, the use of force and violence, and the presence of the armed militia is also one big hindrance why solution and a peaceful resolution is not becoming possible. And then is the AFSPA presence. So in order to ensure that this violent insurgency is tackled, the center has imposed AFSPA, so which has led to the central armed forces being present. So the state governments aren't cooperating, and whatever failure happens in measures that are being taken in the state, then the state government just conveniently blames the center and the presence of the central armed forces there. So this is kind of resulting in a vacuum there where the governance structures are not being responsive. So this is one reason. And eighth reason is there is lack of transparency regarding any measure that is being taken in the region. For instance, in 2015, the central government signed a framework agreement with the NSC and IM, but then the details of this agreement was never put up in the public domain, and nobody till date knows anything what was agreed upon in the 2015 agreement. So there is lack of transparency also. Then is multiple interpretation that is done by the multiple parties which are involved in this in the negotiations and in the final coming to the solution. So whatever is agreed upon between the various groups, the state government, the central government, and NSC and IM and other groups which claim to represent Nagas, the whatever is being agreed upon, they are interpreted in different multiple ways by the parties involved. And the last reason is the weakness in the governance. So the development has not taken place here. So the political strength has not been that strong, and this is because of this political weakness and the weakness in the governance that even the militias have been thriving there. So this vacuum in the governance and the strong governance is also another reason for problem not seeing the resolution. And another one important reason is that the approach by the government itself is faulty. So the government never seems to have a long-term vision with respect to the problems in the Northeast. So government attempts to solve this problem in isolation, and it takes every northeastern state one at a time. So as though it is very typical to one particular northeastern state. So there is no long-term vision, and the problems are seen in isolation, taking one northeastern state at a time. And this approach itself is faulty. So these are the reasons for the prevalence of insurgency even today. And when we talk about the solution you will have to again, you can categorize it in terms of security related solution, development related solution, and solution which leads to negotiations with the groups which are active in the region. So when it comes to so you can put the various steps under these three categories. So you can talk about giving more autonomy to them rather than creating a separate state or greater Nagaland, which is impossible. So more autonomy can be given to them so that their culture and identity is protected. Then these groups should be made to first of all surrender the arms and weapons that they are carrying. And from the government's side, there must be no suspension of the operation by security forces until there is a surrender of arms and weapons by these groups. And we also need to come out with a comprehensive package for the Naga people so that there is a holistic development of them. And we need to enhance the capacity and capability of the state security apparatus, including the state armed police forces, so that the army can be pulled out of the states and the AFSPA can be removed from the state. Then we also need to focus on development initiatives in the state so that these states are economically stronger, they are able to generate jobs for the local people, and so that these states are not entirely dependent upon the center's aids and the packages. So economic development of the region is one thing that is very important. And we also need to improve connectivity of the northeastern with the mainland, so that will give a greater push for the development in these regions also. At the same time, government needs to cooperate with the neighboring countries of Myanmar, Bangladesh, Bhutan, from where these insurgent groups may also be getting their arms and other supplies. So a holistic multi-pronged approach will only help us to deal with this crisis. So we have discussed clearly what are the reasons and what should be the way forward or the solution for this problem. So we'll see today's question. Analyze the reasons for skewed sex ratio in India. It is a 10-mark question for 150. So that's it for today. Thank you.